Mr. Brooke didn't even say thank you, but as he stooped for the unromantic tool, he kissed his little bride behind the folding door with a look that made Aunt March whisk out her handkerchief with a sudden dew in her sharp old eyes. A crash, a cry, and a laugh from Laurie, accompanied by "Jupiter Ammon, Joe's upset the cake again," caused a momentary flurry, which was hardly over when a flock of cousins arrived. "Don't let that young giant come near me. He worries me worse than mosquitoes," whispered the old lady to Amy, as the rooms filled and Laurie's black head towered above the rest. "He has promised to be very good today, and he can be perfectly elegant if he likes," returned Amy. There was no bridal procession, but a sudden silence fell upon the room as Mr. March and the young pair took their places under the green arch. Mother and sisters gathered close, as if loath to give Meg up. The fatherly voice broke more than once, which only seemed to make the service more beautiful and solemn. The bridegroom's hand trembled visibly, and no one heard his replies. But Meg looked straight up in her husband's eyes and said, "I will," with such tender trust in her own face and voice that her mother's heart rejoiced, and Aunt March sniffed audibly. There was no elaborate breakfast, but a plentiful lunch of cake and fruit dressed with flowers. After lunch, people strolled about by twos and threes through house and garden, enjoying the sunshine. Meg and John happened to be standing together in the middle of the grass plot when Laurie was seized with an inspiration which put the finishing touch to this unfashionable wedding. "All the married people take hands and dance round the new-made husband and wife, while we bachelors and spinsters prance in couples outside," cried Laurie, promenading down the path with Amy with such infectious spirit that everyone else followed their example. Mr. and Mrs. March, Aunt and Uncle Carroll, began it. Others rapidly joined in, but the crowning joke was Mr. Lawrence and Aunt March, for when the stately old gentleman chassed solemnly up to the old lady, she just tucked her cane under her arm and hopped briskly away to join hands with the rest and dance about the bridal pair. Want of breath brought the impromptu ball to a close, and then people began to go. The little house was not far away, and the only bridal journey Meg had was the quiet walk with John, from the old home to the new. When she came down, in her dove-colored suit and straw bonnet tied with white, they all gathered about her to say good-bye, as tenderly as if she had been going to make the grand tour. They stood watching her, with faces full of love and hope and tender pride, as she walked away, with her hands full of flowers, and the June sunshine brightening her happy face. And so Meg's married life began. Fortune suddenly smiled upon Joe. Every few weeks she would shut herself up in her room, writing away at her novel with all her heart and soul, for till that was finished she could find no peace. She did not think herself a genius by any means, but when the writing fit came on, she gave herself up to it with entire abandon, and led a blissful life, unconscious of want, care, or bad weather, while she sat safe and happy in an imaginary world. She was just recovering from one of these attacks when she was prevailed upon to escort Miss Crocker to a lecture on the pyramids. They were early, and Jo amused herself by examining the faces of the people who occupied the seat with them. On her right, her only neighbor was a studious-looking lad, absorbed in a newspaper. Pausing to turn a page, the lad saw her looking, and offered half his paper, saying bluntly, "Want to read it? That's a first-rate story." Jo accepted it with a smile, and soon found herself involved in the usual labyrinth of love, mystery, and murder. "Prime, isn't it?" asked the boy. "I think you and I could do as well as that if we tried," returned Jo, amused at his admiration of the trash. "I should think I was a pretty lucky chap if I could. She makes a good living out of such stories."